Good morning, everybody. It's delightful to be here with you on this Zoom, and thank you for coming to this Disability Summer School panel. It's going to be a really exciting one. But first off, um, my name is Eleanor Walsh. I'm going to be chairing this panel today. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white Irish woman with long brown hair. I'm wearing glasses and a blue jumper, and I'm sitting up against a white wall with arty postcards on it. So I look arty. Uh, can I ask our three panelists to go around and introduce yourselves, say a little bit about what you do, and audio describe yourselves? Jess, can we start with you?
Biscuit, hello, Biscuit. I am Jess Tom. I'm a writer, artist, and a part-time superhero. Biscuit, I'm a 40-year-old white woman, Biscuit, with short, curly brown hair, a Biscuit, and a very cool wheelchair. Biscuit, I have Tourette syndrome, so I make movements and noises I can't control called tics. Biscuit, so you're going to hear the word biscuit a lot, Biscuit, and see me thumping my chest. I'm sitting in a room surrounded by pictures. Biscuit, cats.
Thank you, Jess. Your picture is looking a lot nicer than mine. Louise, can we move on to you?
I appreciate both pictures. My name is Louise Nealon. I'm a writer. My pronouns are she, her, and I have long, dark brunette hair, tied in a ponytail and glasses. I'm a 30-year-old woman, and I am sitting in my mammy's good room. So you will see my mother's pride and joy behind me, a really fancy artwork that no one can really know what it is. It's red. And yeah, I'm a writer.
Thank you so much, Louise. It's great to see everybody's artwork in their backgrounds. Morwenna, finally.
Hello, everyone. My name's Morwenna. My pronouns are she, her also. And I'm also a white woman in my very late 30s. And I have blue rimmed glasses and dark hair tied back in a bun today. Today I'm wearing a navy cardigan and a stripy shirt. And I'm also sitting in front of some artwork in my son's bedroom. So I have a very colourful abstract picture of a bear behind me today. And I am an independent arts consultant specialising in diversity, access and inclusion. And at the moment, I'm also the interim CEO of a small not-for-profit here in Australia called Accessible Arts, which is our peak body supporting disabled artists. And I've got a background as a classical musician and I identify as disabled.
Thank you so much, everybody. And welcome again to NUI Galway's Disability Summer School and to today's panel on supporting disabled artists. Over the past couple of weeks in the summer school, we've been hearing and learning and talking about disabled people's right to experience and access and create art and culture. And today we're going to be talking a bit about what's actually like to do in practice and how we can support disabled artists in making art and contributing to our cultural landscapes. It's really exciting that the NUIG Summer School can actually happen this year. And thank you all so much for joining us. I'm going to start by asking you all the same question. Can you talk a bit more about your work in the arts? Because you all come from different disciplines, you have lots of different expertise, and I'm going to start again with Jess.
Hi, Jess. Hi, Biscuit. Biscuit. So 11 years ago, I co-founded Tourette Zero, which is an arts organisation that works across art forms and shares the humour and creativity of Tourette syndrome, uses that as a starting point, but campaigns for a more accessible and socially just world using creativity. Biscuit. And Tourette Zero really started because of a conversation with my co-founder, Matthew Poutney, Biscuit, about about my tics and about Tourette's. We'd had lots of conversations before, and we worked together in inclusive play. So that's my background is as an inclusive play worker and as a visual artist, Biscuit. And Matthew said to me in this conversation, he said that he described Tourette's as a crazy language generating machine, Biscuit, and told me that not doing something creative with it would be wasteful. And that idea took root. I was able to hear that sentence in a totally different way to anything that I'd heard before, any way I've thought before about Tourette's. And it was the start of Tourette's Hero and the start of me allowing myself to think about disability and my lived experiences and neurodiversity as part of my creative practice, and not constantly trying to ignore that part of who I was or keep it separate. Biscuit, Tourette's Hero works across art forms. We work with galleries and museums, we work with theatres, Biscuit. We make artwork, Biscuit, so we have a creative programme that includes making performance. So our most recent performance was a Biscuit neurodiverse presentation of Samuel Beckett's Not I. That's the first piece of work that we've sort of taken on that hasn't been devised and created by us as a team, but we were really keen to challenge the cultural curation that happens, Biscuit, both about what roles disabled performers can take on and what disabled audiences get to see. Biscuit, I'm a big advocate for a type of performance called relaxed performance, which takes a relaxed approach to noise and movement, Biscuit, coming from the audience, Biscuit, and aims to address some of the invisible barriers to our cultural spaces. Hedgehog, Biscuit, cat. I don't think relaxed performance is the whole answer, and I've been working with Battersea Arts Centre on the concept of becoming a relaxed venue. So what happens if we embed a relaxed approach to as part of every, as part of the whole program, as part of the building, so that and the sort of principles of that involve taking labour away from disabled people, and meaning that like a varied program is open to us. Biscuit, another big part of Tourette's Hero's work is big immersive creative events for children and adults, disabled and non-disabled children and adults. We believe very strongly in the power of creativity, but particularly the transformative power of that, and the protective qualities of positive memories. How positive memories can be important, particularly disabled children and young people, so that they know that when they encounter barriers in the world, it doesn't have to be like that. So we aim to put on big, creative, immersive events in public spaces that offer a radical welcome to disabled children and young people and help build their capacity to resist. Biscuit. So yeah, we work. One of the things that I love about Tourette's Hero is that I get to work in many different contexts as an artist, and I think, yeah, I feel very fortunate to have that freedom. Biscuit, cats.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that fantastic introduction to Tourette's Hero. I was lucky enough to see your show backstage at Biscuitland in Dublin Theatre Festival a couple of years ago now. But it was so inspiring and invigorating, and it's made me a huge fan of relaxed performance and a bit of a fangirl of yours ever since. So thanks so much, and I hope you get to, when everything is safe, get to come back to Dublin soon. Louise, same question. Would you mind telling us a little bit about your work in the arts and as a writer?
Yeah, just to echo you, Eleanor, that performance of Beckett sounds incredible, and yeah, I'm definitely going to check it out. So thanks, Jess. So yes, I am a writer, and to be honest, I'm going to flag right now that I'm a bit nervous / terrified to be on this panel. So I'm going to be looking at my notes a lot because I tend to go off on tangents. And I'm delighted to be participating in this because I think it's one of the most important events that I've done.
We're delighted to have you.
Thank you. I have fallen victim to some of the misconceptions and prejudices that I usually accuse others of having when it comes to misconceptions around mental health. I struggle to see my experience of depression and anxiety as something with yet another fixed label, a disability. I have found myself asking, is experiencing depression and anxiety the equivalent to having a real disability? Now, disability is defined as a physical or mental condition that limits a person's movements, senses, or activities. And from this definition, I would consider myself to be disabled. Disability exists when a person struggles to orientate themselves to the perceived reality of other people in their community. So in my late teens and early 20s, I experienced severe depression and anxiety, and I felt alienated from my family, my friends, and the world around me. And it was only through reading books and writing fiction that I was able to forge a meaningful and authentic relationship to the world. So I believe that that the arts has a really important role in connecting us to each other. And I believe that psychology and arts, there is a capacity for it to go more hand in hand. So I'm a writer. My first book, Snowflake, has been released this month. And it's a massive achievement and moment for me to see it on the shelf. It's an idea that I've had since I was 18. I woke up in the middle of the night convinced that a dream I had belonged to somebody else. And so when I went to my doctor and told him this, he just referred me on to a psychiatrist for a more expensive conversation. And the psychiatrist wasn't really interested in my dream delusions. He just put me on medication. And I struggled because I had very little money in my 20s for therapy. But I am privileged enough my parents supported me. And I found I had to try a lot of different kinds of therapy to find the type that worked for me. And I'm interested in democratizing that mental health services, while also not taking it away from professionals. I think that there's a lot of good eggs in the mental health services. I believe that it's a structural issue, and I believe that the arts has a fundamental role in helping and working with psychologists and especially psychiatry in improving mental health services.
Thank you so much. That's an incredibly important message. Before we move on, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what Snowflake is about, and yes, your novel, and how much does your sense of mental illness as disability filter through that?
Yeah. So Snowflake is a story about a woman who dreams other people's dreams. And that woman is Maeve. Debbie is the main character, and Maeve is her mother. And Maeve stays in a room an awful lot and records her dreams and doesn't really connect with the outside world. And she believes that it's a genetic condition that she's passed on to Debbie. So she was always interested in Debbie's dreams growing up and not necessarily her real or lived reality. And Debbie is quite close to her uncle, Billy, who assures her that the dreams are nonsense, and that her way out of her mother's fate is to go to university and educate herself out of the dreams or the delusions. And so, yeah, I basically Maeve, the mother, is a projection of how I saw myself in the future if I didn't address my own mental health. Her room is my room. It's filled with lots of art and postcards and quotes about dreams. I was obsessed with them. And I kind of had to give my obsession to her in order to write the book. So yeah, and Debbie Goes to University, which is very much my experience of university. I keep on having to remind people in interviews that I'm not my main character. And that fiction is a really important space to discover who we aren't as well as who we are. I've lots in common with my characters, but there's also so much inside all of us that we just can't explain, and so much mess. And I believe that fiction is a great place to play with that.
Thank you so much. Hopefully I might get back onto that later, but for now, I want to ask Morwenna. Hi, Morwenna. Thank you for waiting. Can you talk to us a little bit about your work in the arts, and as a consultant, you have so many roles in the arts as well.
Yeah, thank you. And so great to hear those intros from Jess and Louise. Jess, I've also been a fangirl for many times and was lucky enough to see the Beckett at Unlimited a few years ago. And yeah, holy cow, that has to just travel the world and come to Australia, please. And Louise, thank you for mentioning the whole "am I disabled enough" question, because I'm also someone that lives with invisible impairment, and I think a lot of us in that category have imposter syndrome around this. And I think being involved in conversations like this and, you know, connecting to the disability community in so many ways are really important for you know, people, yeah, for everyone, but I think sometimes particularly for people with invisible impairment to feel like we belong, and we absolutely belong here today, and in all the other things that we do with this community. And I suppose, so for me, I started work as a consultant a couple of years ago, and before that I had a really long career in arts funding agencies. So I spent nearly a decade at the Australia Council, which is our national sort of arts council. And I got some good traction there. I did things like develop their first disability action plan for the organisation, made the grant programs more accessible, got more disabled people assessing the grants, and was also able to get some dedicated funding specifically to support disabled artists through a couple of different programs. But I felt like my ability to really create positive change in a government environment was really slow. And I got, I guess, a bit frustrated with the pace of change, which I think is something that's common across arts and disability generally. So kind of leaping out of that world into the world of consulting has been really exciting, because I get to work with arts organisations really quickly now to make change. And a lot of what I do is around advising arts organisations on things like strategy, planning, program design, and I deliver a lot of training, sort of EDI or disability specific training. And I suppose to put that in context, to give you some examples of what I actually do. So this week for me, and obviously we're lucky here in Australia to be a little bit mobile, more mobile than you guys are. So I was in Canberra earlier in the week, running some focus groups for the National Gallery of Australia's first Disability Action Plan. I had a session with the Sydney Festival advising them on accessible programming. And I've just finished a report for the Sydney Opera House on how they can make sure that inclusion is embedded in their new artistic strategy. So the variety of what I get to do now is so exciting, and I love working across art forms and across organisations large and small. But I think one of my real passions at the moment, because of my background as a musician, is the work that I'm doing with the music industry here in Australia. You know, it's been one of the industries I think that's been hit particularly hard. You know, a lot of our venues are shutting down right now, sort of all focused on survival. But what I'm trying to do is have a conversation about what an inclusive recovery looks like and how we can build back better and more inclusively. And I've been lucky enough to get some grant funding to work with 20 small to medium-sized live music venues across the city of Sydney to look at their access as they reopen, which is really exciting. So that sort of follows on from a Churchill Fellowship I did just before lockdown, visiting music organisations across the UK and the US. And I feel like music is an art form that's a little bit behind the curve compared to where some of the other art forms are at. So that's what I'm putting a lot of focus into at the moment.
Fantastic, thank you. It's really cool to hear about the variety in your work as a consultant on arts inclusion, especially now that you don't have to do all of that on Zoom anymore.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah. Fingers crossed that day will come soon for us over here as well. You mentioned that you found the pace of change could be a bit slower in the government, and that, or for a government agency, and that now as we're coming into, well, not a post-COVID world, and maybe fingers crossed a post-lockdown world at least, we have to bring everyone along in our recovery, and make sure that nobody's left behind. And that brings me sort of on to my next question for you, Morwenna, which is, what do you think are the biggest barriers to disabled people participating in the arts? Either from your experience or from what you've observed in your work.
Obviously, that's a huge question with so many
Yes.
different the two things I thought I mentioned, and I'm sure my panelists will throw many others into the mix. I think here in Australia at the moment, the two biggest areas are around training pathways, lack of accessible training pathways, and also employment, of course, too. And we've got some pretty terrifying statistics here in Australia for our disabled artists who, through a recent report, we found earn 42% less than their non-disabled counterparts.
Wow.
And we know things like 18% of the Australian population identifies as disabled, but only 9% of our artists do. And I think that's really interesting around sort of comfort of disclosure, people's, experiencing barriers to be able to get to a place where they feel they can call themselves artists. So, there's kind of a lot in that. And I think, just on the training pathways thing, we know that sometimes disabled artists take alternative pathways to how they develop their craft and their careers. And I really think that our mainstream arts institutions have to lift their game in terms of making themselves more accessible. And, it's great to see places like the Royal Conservatoire, having its BSL theatre program and things like that. But there's still organisations and institutions like that are still so much in the minority. And I think, the conservatoire model has such a kind of archaic way of doing things and rooted in a lot of tradition and, and history. And this is the way we've always done things, and we can't do anything differently kind of mindset. So I think training pathways are still a huge barrier for people, and arts institutions really need to look at the importance of inclusion and including people, and also what inclusion actually means. And of course, employment is such an obvious one in terms of barriers. And I think there's so many arts organisations that are inaccessible in terms of attitudes, of course, the physical built environment. And, like I'm sure you guys do, we get the heritage building excuse here a lot. We can't be accessible because we've got a heritage to deal with. And I think also things like, accessible communication is not something we do particularly well in the arts. So I think, and sometimes, because I do a lot of planning with arts organisations, and, when you get an arts org that will have a disability employment strategy or have a diversity employment strategy, so often those are about internships and low-level positions, and they're never ambitious enough to imagine having disabled people at all levels of an organisation, heaven forbid leading an organisation or being on the board. And for me, I think there's nothing as effective as just having people in the building to lead and create positive change. And I'd love to see Australia really develop this agent of change model that I know Jess has been involved with at Battersea, and many other amazing disabled artists have been a part of. And I think at the end of the day, we just need to have more disabled people in the buildings, as it were, whatever the buildings even mean now with Zoom, but and in positions of power and influence, not just interning. So there's my 2 cents on that question.
Fantastic. I really liked your note on how a lot of organizations who might feel that they've considered bringing disabled people into the organization can't imagine, maybe for a number of reasons, or haven't imagined them climbing the ladder, or how they could climb the ladder, and how they can include them in all aspects of the organization, not just entry-level positions. Jess, I'm going to ask you the same question. What do you feel are the biggest barriers to disabled people participating in the arts?
Okay, so I've got some thoughts on this.
Right.
So first up, I suppose I think that there is historically a lack of appreciation of the brilliance, variety, diversity of disability culture, and I think that affects both mainstream venues, programmers, and disabled people as artists and creatives. So I think we're each having to work out our own way through lots of sort of internalized ableism that's created by the negative narratives around disability that are so limited and so dominant that all we have to draw on are sort of medical charity model ideas that that split disabled people into tragic and brave. And that's not the reality. And I think that holds everybody back in various ways. It's certainly those internalized preconceptions affected my ability to feel how free I felt to be the artist I wanted to be. And I think it certainly affects people's venues' confidence in celebrating, appreciating, and talking about disability culture. Because the art, activism, and academic thinking that comes out of the lived experience of barriers is varied, thought-provoking, funny, powerful, irreverent. It's everything. And it's disability culture is our shared culture. I think in terms of access to opportunities and to working as a disabled artist, I feel very fortunate to live in the UK, where we have a program called Access to Work, which provides the practical support working disabled people need to do their jobs. This means that it is not linked to my employer and to having a good employer or having a good situation. I can move around, take up different opportunities, and still know that my support requirements can be met. It's not perfect. It has been made rubbish as a system, but actually having had the opportunity to travel internationally, Access to Work is one of the things that disabled artists in other parts of the world often want to talk to me about, because it has a lot of it gives a lot of control to me. I think that in the UK, we're lucky over the last 10 years to have had a really, really strong leadership from Arts Council England and from Unlimited, which it commissions and champions disabled artists. And I can see that in the last decade, a load has changed in terms of how disability arts is talked about and thought about within the wider art sector. And I think some mainstream venues are starting to notice when they don't have disabled artists on their program. That feels like a low bar, but I think it's the start. Knowing that you have a gap is the first step. I think there are real problems around basic access and basic equality of opportunity. There was a really thoughtful piece written in the New York Times about the reopening of the UK theatre scene at the end of last week. And it was really well written, actually, I think, and shared very varied perspectives of which mine was one. But they also quoted a venue that was a high profile, well-funded national arts venue talking about doubling its relaxed performance offer And then the journalist pointed out that that meant going from 1 relaxed performance a year to 2. And I think that there is still very much a charity thinking around access. It's a nice thing that we do for disabled people, not about equalizing access to our shared cultural life. And so I think that those ideas and the idea that as long as it's technically accessible to disabled people, then that's enough. And I don't think that is enough. I want equality of experience, equality of opportunity, and I want to reduce the labour that disabled people have to do when it comes to accessing creativity, because it transforms lives, because I felt that transformative power, and that the pace of change is frustratingly slow, but it doesn't have to be. I think that's one of the things that's really interesting and revealing around, say, the pandemic, is that all of those things that we've been told have to be that way and are impossible to change, transformed overnight when it was in everybody's, and particularly non-disabled people's, interests. So I want to make sure that we continue to reveal that the exclusion of disabled people is not natural. It's not a product of our bodies or minds working in non-normative ways. It's a product of the disabling barriers and decisions that are being made all around us all the time, and that our environments and arts buildings send us messages. Too often as a disabled person, those messages are, you aren't welcome, you haven't been thought about, you're a fire hazard. Biscuit, I want to change them to be, you are valued, your perspective is interesting to us, what do you require? How can we support you? Biscuit, here's some money to make some work. Crack on.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I thought I froze there for a second. I really liked the idea of one of the barriers to disabled artists participating in arts and culture, and especially mainstream arts and culture, is the lack of knowledge that there's such a thing as disabled culture and disability arts. And again, the sense that anything to do with disabled people is an exercise in charity. So letting disabled people in the building, whether as audiences or artists, is also then about charity and, oh, aren't we great, and everything. And I think that that getting past that mindset, as you say, has come a long way in the past 10 years, in the past 5 years, and hopefully we can bring those changes and more inclusive practices from over the past year, from over the lockdowns, with us as things reopen. Louise, I'm going to come to you now. I'm going to ask you the same question. What are the biggest barriers to disabled people participating in the arts? And especially, I think, I was thinking about writing and literature, and how it's more often seen as a solitary practice, as a solitary form, compared to, say, making a show.
Yeah.
Does that differ?
Yeah. Just to riff off Jess there for a second, the whole simplified narrative around being either tragic or brave drives me absolutely crazy. If I'm on one more podcast or radio and people call me brave for just speaking about my own experiences and my own life, I will actually scream. I want there to be a world in which I can come on and talk about my own lived experiences, and say I was a bit sad for a while, and for people to be like, oh great, I was sad too, you know, and for people not to be uncomfortable around sadness. So yes, I think there's a massive problem with labeling, and also vague narratives and misinformation as well. Just a small caveat or example of how I was discriminated against in university, and relied on people's individual charity, was I asked for an extension of one lecture, citing mental health reasons, and they just didn't give it to me. And I accepted that. You know, they called me lazy, or they were like, no, you had enough time to do it. And I just accepted that, and I didn't question it. And another flip side to that was when I told another lecturer that I had mental health difficulties, that I was on medication, he took me out for dinner and interviewed me about my whole life story, and something I was very interesting. And he was well-meaning and he wanted to learn, but that's also a problem, you know? So I think definitely we need to move away from an us and them mentality, move away towards labels and saying, oh, she has depression, or she is depressed, or she suffers from anxiety, towards she has anxiety sometimes, or she is depressing. Moving away from nouns towards verbs. And verbs are something that everyone can do. So yeah, that is a massive thing for me. Establishing boundaries is important, as opposed to having label. For me to say, I'm not comfortable going for dinner with you and talk about my mental illness, and for people to be all right with that, that's something that I think is a massive barrier, because it's an emotional barrier, you know. And around writing, there's a lot of interpersonal relationships that are very casual. For instance, I'm part of a writers group, and I was part of several writers group. It took me a while to find the right fit for me. But writers groups are sort of like therapy, but we're not supervised. So we go in and spill our guts out on a page, and people can attack each other. So I think there's opportunity there, definitely, for writers of all abilities, of all. I think, like, we have a practice in our writing group where it's a closed writing group now, but if you join, there's a code of ethics to adhere to. And one of the things that I really think is a problem is people ignoring the psychological and emotional work around writing. You're not closed off in a room by yourself, and the arts isn't some magical bubble that protects you from the rest of the world. I funded myself in the arts by being a waitress, which was disastrous because I suffered from anxiety. So I used to go home at the end of my shift and look at TripAdvisor to see who complained about me. Because I was a terrible waitress. Another thing I did was I milked cows with my dad, which worked better for me because it was manual labor. I felt a sense of achievement. And I was able to think about the stuff I was working on in my head while working the machine or whatever. So yeah, those two things, misinformation, vague slogans around mind your mental health, I believe are quite dangerous. Because people are not telling you how to mind your mental health. We have very limited choices. So for instance, I was constantly being recommended CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which didn't work for me. And when I tried to tell a psychiatrist that it didn't work for me, she said, okay, we'll just call it something else. Which is infantilizing and disrespectful, but
very much so.
Yeah, again, I just took it because I sometimes think that I have a disability and that I look quite young for my age. So I'm 30 years old, but I look about 16 sometimes, and I'm not at all. That's probably a stupid thing to say, but people are quite fond of infantilizing young people, and there's a pandemic around mental health and young people these days, and we're definitely we need to be given more responsibility. No wonder we're all getting dogs, like, you know. Give us more responsibility, give us more power, I think the world would be a lot better place if young people were taken more seriously.
That's very true. You said something really interesting about boundaries and how important it is to set boundaries. And often in the arts, where you're expected to like spill your guts out and and bare your soul at every opportunity for the work, it can be hard to do that without, say, having to bring in the notion of being disabled and having to ask for accommodations, and I need support with this because of my X. And that can be a difficult thing to have to keep doing over and over again to try and get the support you need to, go into a rehearsal room or a writer's group and then like bare your soul again.
Yeah, it's very tiring. And even like I was on one radio show and the host was like, you have no filter and you have no boundaries, and I was like, no, I do. I'm not telling you.
Wow.
And it's bizarre, and especially because it is quite an invisible impairment, and you kind of have to keep reminding yourself and others that you need support. And also everyone is trying to forge an authentic relationship with the world around them. And we all have different needs, and if we're just compassionate and have respect for each other, then it'll be a lot easier.
It was. I'm going to ask you, Louise, then following from that, what things have you seen that are useful for supporting disabled artists then off the back of that? And that could be things that have supported you in your practice or things that you've observed for other artists.
Yes. So I think fun is the first thing that I really think is useful, especially with talking about fun and humor, especially when talking about depression and mental illness. Everyone thinks that if every discussion you have around mental illness and depression needs to be serious and solemn even, and I think that's quite dangerous. I think that the antidote for me when I was feeling quite down was to watch comedy. And I think I learned a lot from comedy. Not only did it make me laugh, but it also provided another antidote to how I could communicate my vulnerabilities to the world. So when I saw a comedian on TV talk about their mental health issues in a way that made people laugh and seemed powerful, that was really eye-opening for me. Other things are connection, communication, and creativity. So, for instance, I didn't realize it at the time, but I used to be part of a youth program called Mehel. It's in Irish secondary schools, and it's actually run by the diocese. So a secular version of Mehel would be very welcome in creative spaces. So Mehel is an Irish word. It's an old Irish word that means community, and it comes from farming. So say my dad is a dairy farmer, and when he has to cut silage and cover the silage pit, all of the farmers around us come and help us for no money, or the only thing is, like, when they do their silage and they might have a smaller pit or a larger pit, we go and help them, and it's a symbiotic relationship, and I think that we can learn a lot from that in the arts. So the youth leadership program, we went for a week, and we lived. I was I thought it was kind of like a really happy cult. I could see the appeals of cult when I was there, but it was a very creative space. There was different activities that we did, different art disciplines. So we had music, but we were also music, art, discussions. We learned how to, we were in a group of 10 and we learned how to make decisions through consensus. And we were learning leadership skills and also a bit of psychology, while also participating creatively with each other and collaboratively. And I think that collaboration really helped me as a young person who was, we didn't even know that we were forging these really strong connections and relationships while engaging within the arts. And I really do think that really helped, because some of us were suffering from mental health and some weren't. But the truth is that everyone needs connection. And I think that line between helping disabled people and helping all people is really, it kind of disappears at some point. Like Jess was saying, disabled arts is all arts, you know. And I think something that was important was that people who might not have realized that they had mental health issues, or that's a really big thing for me, people who don't see themselves as depressed. I didn't used to see myself as depressed. I had a really bad negativity bias, and I still do have a small voice inside my head saying, you're not depressed, you're just looking for attention. And you're manipulating people around you to give you sympathy. And now, through years of therapy and education, I've learned to lower that voice. But I'm still aware that the people who most need help aren't necessarily people who ask for help. It's also people who are not being heard and people who don't identify as having mental health issues. So another thing that is really useful for me is an event in Belfast called 10 by 9. It's a storytelling event, and 9 people have up to 10 minutes to tell a real life story. And it used to happen in real life, but now it's on Zoom and it's run by these 2 amazing guys. And it's a night of storytelling and fun and connection, and it's just incredible. And like I say, it's open to the public, but it seems to draw people who have really interesting stories.
Okay, thank you so much, Louise. Jess, I'm going to zip over to you. So what things have you seen that are useful in supporting disabled artists? You mentioned access to work a little while ago, and though it mightn't be perfect in practice at UCA, we're still all very jealous.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think I just can't imagine how I would work without access to work, how I would have kept working in jobs that I love when my access requirements changed. The most important thing about access to work is that it means that you're not that you have control and agency around the support and who's providing it and how it's provided, and that travels with you to different types of employment, and that you're not having to then pass that cost. It doesn't cost more to employ a disabled person. And I think I'm still learning stuff about what works for me and my access requirements. I think often there's this idea that disabled people inherently know what their access requirements are. Often you only know that by having them well met. So for example, I started using a job aid during the pandemic, separate to my support worker, and a job aid, understanding that role is somebody who has specialist skills who can help you with a particular part of your role that maybe your capacity to do has, is impacted by your impairment. So for me, I've been working with, I was a fundraiser by training, and I used to love that, like building projects and that sort of idea of development, but it was something that I felt I couldn't do as my sort of pain and energy levels changed. So working with a job aid over the pandemic has been really powerful because it's given me back that control. That's years down the line, and I just didn't know that that was a thing. And that was, lots of that is also, everything useful I've learned about being a disabled person has come from other disabled people. And so I think, and I'm also aware how it can be limited by the politics of where you are, how easy it is to set your expectations by the political reality of the place you're in. And that's why I think it really matters to have conversations about disability rights and justice across borders, and sort of understand ourselves as part of a sort of global movement. I think something that I didn't mention before, which I think is a big barrier, and that I think it's important to understand in order to provide correct support, is that and Morwenna touched on it briefly talking about internships, is that the arts as a sector is built on unpaid labor and overwork, and that is unequal, and that's a barrier for lots of disabled people, but it's also a barrier for people with caring responsibilities, people who have unstable incomes, like all sorts of reasons why that culture of and that framing of, if you're sending emails late at night, that's a sign of your dedication rather than an unmanageable workload. Those are barriers as much as a flight of steps or a lack of captioning. Biscuit. So I think it's really important that we name some of those unhealthy practices and stop promoting them as and buying into them. So for me, one way that I've done that, Biscuit, is and this again came from something Matthew, the co-founder of Tourette's Zero, said to me. Biscuit, as I started to experience impairments that related to pain and energy more, my body changed, and I was finding it really hard to let go of some of those normative assumptions about what it means to be productive and valuable. And he said, well, we can take a socialist approach to energy. So we all put in the energy that we've got and we make things happen with that. And if we're all tired at the end of the day, that's equal. We don't need to count hours. And that's again switched my thinking and allowed me to let go of a load of stuff. And in practice, it means that I take regular breaks. I have a schedule that includes an afternoon nap. Like, we can build schedules that work for us, but nobody tells us this. And I think part of that is around working out what you require and then learning how to communicate that to other people in uncompromising, in sort of clear ways. And I think that access riders have a part to play in that. So an access rider is something that's being increasingly developed as a tool, certainly in UK practice, which helps disabled artists communicate their access requirements. I think it's important that venues, there's a concept called forced intimacy that a writer called Mia Mingus in the States coined and talks about. And I found that a really powerful idea, because that's the idea that as a disabled person, we often need to give loads more information about ourselves to access the same opportunities.
Yeah.
And I think, and the important bit of that is how many times have we all seen, like, tell us about your access requirements without any information about what's provided. So we need to get better. That needs to be a culture of communication. So we need venues to say what's accessible and non-accessible, to say what they are providing, so that disabled people can then communicate their requirements, not in a vacuum, but in relation to that. And so that we're not having to give unnecessary information, we can give the information that you need to support us well. Changing the sort of overwork culture, access riders. I think we really need to have a intersectional, more intersectional approaches. You know, this is a panel of white women and Black and brown disabled artists face multiple barriers, and as do learning disabled artists. And I think that it's there is some really interesting practice in the UK around learning disabled artists, and working with sort of understanding that how a learning disabled artist can practice potentially as a freelance artist and make the work that matters to them, without that being led by neurotypical folks. So I think that there's loads of seeds of amazing practice. We need to get better at sharing that internationally. We need to take a disability justice framed approach that centers the people who experience the most barriers. Biscuit, fun.
Fantastic. I really liked, or at least when you were talking about your work with a job coach over the past while, you know, it reminded me that especially people outside the arts might think that an artist's whole life, an artist's whole time is purely making the art. But being a working artist involves, and working for yourself involves so much more. And disabled artists need support with that side of it as well, and not just the art. And then,
just to be clear, that the job coaches can be useful, but the role that I was talking about specifically was a job aid. So for me,
my apologies.
So for me, the difference, and I didn't know the difference is that I have a support worker who helps me move about, helps me with the sort of practical things that relate to my impairment. I have job coaches can be useful in terms of thinking about the direction that you're going in. What the job aid enables me to do is that's someone who has specialist skills in particular areas that then helps me do, like, so that with a support worker, I do the work, but through them. A job aid allows me to give some of the work to someone else and to be in control of all the decision making, but that I don't have to do all of the work all of the time myself in order to be in control of that.
Oh, thank you so much for the clarification. My apologies for just running away.
Your point, Biscuit. Your point is still totally valid in terms of the fact that there's so much more to being an artist than just making the work, and that disabled artists need support with all elements of that, and all elements of that need to be accessible. But accessible doesn't have to mean replicating the ways non-disabled people do it. It's totally valid to find different ways of doing and managing those things.
That's really true. We learn so much from each other. And sometimes, like you said, it's hard to know what sort of access requirements we have or what we can ask for until we see someone else asking for it. And that community or mehel is really important. Morwenna, I'm going to finally ask you the same question. What things have you seen that are useful for supporting disabled artists? And a lot of your work as a consultant, I suppose, is in helping organizations bridge those gaps and support disabled artists. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely. And Jess, thanks for mentioning Access Riders. We're about to run a workshop on those here at our conference so that more disabled artists know about them, because I think we need to do some real awareness raising around just knowing that that is a thing that you can provide. And we just need to, embed that into our kind of arts culture here. And also the intersectionality point, super important. And again, for us here in Australia, again, I'm a stat person, and 45% of our First Nations community also live with disabilities. So, the compounding barriers of those two particular intersections is a huge thing for us to really grapple with here. But when I thought about that original question of, how do we support disabled artists? There's, of course, all the usual things that you support any artist with, around connections and brokering opportunities and all that kind of stuff. Mentoring, of course, comes up all the time, though I get a little bit tired of just how many mentoring opportunities exist for disabled artists, because I think there's a lot of value in actually money to do projects rather than just money to be mentored all the time. So, but I think, two kind of specific things to support, or that I've found have worked really well here to support disabled artists. One is just this idea of allies, and having really fantastic non-disabled allies. And, a short case study here in Perth, actually, we were lucky enough to have Wendy Martin as our artistic director of the Perth Festival for 4 years, from 2016 to 2019. And she came to Perth directly after being the programmer of Unlimited at the Southbank Centre. And I think one of the interesting things about working in disability arts is once you know these artists and once you know their work, it stays with you and you take it wherever you go next. And I know that Wendy made, arts and disability a big part of her pitch for getting that job at Perth. And what she did is she brought that passion and dedication and interest to that festival, and it is stuck. It is embedded into the culture of that place now, to the point where they've actually put something around disabled artists in the position description for that artistic director post for forevermore. And, I guess that's one of the challenges that, with artistic directors of things like festivals, people come in and they have their thing and then they go and then the next person has the next thing. But at Perth, Wendy, being the type of ally that she was, she's made it stick. And that is absolutely part of the fabric of that festival now, which is so exciting. And I think on that idea of supporting disabled artists, another thing, and I know this isn't everyone's cup of tea, but I'm a big believer in the power of dedicated programs, targeted programs, whether that's funding programs or, performance opportunities. And I think what dedicated programs do is they put a spotlight on something and they carve out room and carve out space for it. And, we've had a few of these now through the Australia Council. We've been lucky enough to have the Sync Leadership Program here for a couple of years with Joe Ferrant and Sarah Pickthall from the UK, working with our sort of next generations of disabled arts leaders here. We've also had targeted funding for disabled artists to do projects, targeted project funding. And I do think targeted festivals and targeted kind of performance platforms like Unlimited are really important in terms of that spotlighting. And I know that there's a couple kind of in the pipeline here in Australia, and, Unlimited has absolutely been a kind of, beacon that we've looked to. And the power of having all of that work in one place at one time is just useful in terms of bringing programmers to come and see work, to remove the biases that they have around, quality, because that's something we haven't talked about, but I think that's something that still really exists is, stigmas and stereotypes of the quality of disabled artists just not being as good. And certainly, one of the reasons that I work in this area is I love the work, and I think that disabled artists are making some of the most exciting, innovative, groundbreaking, experimental, risk-taking work that's out there, and that's, I want to be part of that, and that's why I do what I do. So I think there is real value in targeted programs, and whether it's funding or performance opportunities or whatever. So that's some of the things we can do to support artists.
Thank you so much, Morwenna. It's access riders are still a very, very new thing here in Ireland. I've seen a couple from the UK, and even still, like, my own internalized ableism comes out whenever I think of writing one, and I can't be, asking for things too early in the process. No, I'll just fail instead. That'll be better. But it's. But that's my own thing that I have to get over and follow the lead of our peers in the UK. I'm aware that we're getting close to our time. So I'm going to ask each of you for your final thoughts on what we've been talking about today. If there's anything you'd like to expand on or you think our delegates should definitely go away with. Morwenna, I'm going to start with you.
I think just leaving with that idea that we need to see disabled artists as assets and appreciate the value and the huge creativity that skill that they bring. And for anyone watching at law summer school, go and see the work of some disabled artists, find it online, become familiar with who's who in the zoo. There are so many incredible artists. Fall in love with them, fall in love with their work, and your life won't be the same again.
Thank you so much. That's a great message for us to give people. Go and see some disabled art. Louise. Oh, I think you're on mute, Louise.
Yes, I am. Yeah, I would like to thank you for inviting me, and it was an absolute pleasure to sit on this panel with such powerful, strong people. And I am aware that I'm very much a newbie. And I think it's important that I'm speaking from a place not as an expert at all, but as a bull in a china shop. And I think I live by the term when we know better, we do better. So I really think that the arts has an extremely important role to play in the language we use around disability, but especially around mental health and mental illness. And I really do think that there must be a more symbiotic relationship between the arts and psychology. I wrote an article for a newspaper, and someone commented underneath and said, why do writers have to be amateur psychologists now? Why can't they just write a book and go away? And I would love to do that. I would really love not to be an amateur psychologist. But I do think that the reason why I need to be is because we live in a world where everyone needs to learn, especially about this stuff and the way to make all of our lives better, and to find the language and the actions around doing better and knowing better. So thanks a million for having me.
Thanks a million for being here. Also, congratulations. I believe Snowflake was picked up by Element Pictures this past week.
Yeah, thanks a million. Yeah, so it's very early in the works now, but it's going to be adapted for TV, which is really exciting. So thanks a million.
Fantastic, well done. And finally, Jess, over to you. Any final thoughts?
Biscuit, I suppose disability isn't a dirty word. We can talk about it without diminishing ourselves. I identify as a disabled artist, and that says nothing negative about me, but it does acknowledge the barriers that I experience in the sector. And I think it's important to name them. So Biscuit, and identifying as a disabled artist is also important so that we can find each other, because I think also it's very easy for disability to be invisible within the process because it's not something people feel confident about talking about. So for me, taking away the idea that disability is not something that we should be ashamed of or be frightened to talk about is really powerful, and that giving and receiving solidarity has power, and that having conversations internationally across borders feels particularly important at the moment. And that there's amazing work being made by disabled artists, and I feel constantly excited about discovering new people, making new things in new ways. And so connecting with artists and connecting with ideas is what has made a difference in my career, and I would encourage other people to explore and to allow themselves space to think about impairment and disability within their practice. I put it off for way too long. Don't make the same mistake. Biscuit, hedgehog.
Very wise words to end on. Thank you so much. Jess, Louise, and Morwenna for joining me and for all of your wise words. It's been absolutely fantastic and inspiring to listen to, and I hope our audience got as much from it. Also, for those of you watching, you can continue the discussion about what you've heard, what you've listened to on this panel on Discord and Twitter using the hashtag 12th DSS. That's 12th with a TH. DSS. And I believe all our panelists are on Twitter as well, if you use Twitter. I hope they don't mind me saying. Then yeah, open. And if you're not already familiar with like disability Twitter or disability arts Twitter, it'll blow your mind. Thank you all so much for joining us and for joining the Disability Summer School again this year. I hope you've enjoyed this panel and learned something from it, and maybe started opening your minds and thinking new things, and learned about how we can support disabled artists as we move into our recovery stage. Thank you so much, and have a nice day.